Hello, my name is Layla Ahmad, and I'm here to tell you a story that completely changed my life. It's a story about faith, transformation, and a journey to discover the truth. For most of my life, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I was going. I was a devout Muslim, committed to my faith and to the teachings I had grown up with. My days were structured around prayer, fasting, and living in a way I believed was pleasing to Allah. But what happened to me on a spring day in April 2018 would open my eyes to something I never expected. It would challenge everything I believed and lead me to a truth I never thought possible. If you're watching this, I hope you'll stay with me until the end. This isn't just my story, it's a message for anyone who has ever wondered if there's more to life, more to faith, and more to God than what they've been told. I was born in Amman, Jordan, into a family deeply rooted in Islamic traditions. My father, Kareem, was an imam, and our home was filled with the sound of Quranic recitations and discussions about theology. From a young age, my siblings and I were taught the importance of submission to Allah and adherence to the 5 pillars of Islam. One of my earliest memories is of sitting on my father's lap, learning to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. He would guide my small hands over the words, his voice steady and firm as he explained their meaning. "Layla," he would say, "this is your path to Jannah. Follow it with all your heart, and Allah will reward you." I took his words to heart, dedicating myself to prayer, fasting, and study. By the time I was 13, I had memorized several chapters of the Quran and could recite them flawlessly. My parents were proud, and I felt a sense of purpose in being part of something greater than myself. When I was 22, my family arranged my marriage to a man named Omar, who had moved to the United States to pursue his career as an engineer. We settled in Houston, Texas, where Omar had built a life for himself. Adjusting to life in America was both exciting and challenging. The culture was so different from what I had known, but Omar and I were determined to preserve our faith and traditions. We joined a close-knit Muslim community, attended prayers at the mosque, and celebrated Islamic holidays with other families. Our home became a sanctuary of faith. I wore the hijab proudly, cooked traditional Jordanian meals, and raised our 3 children, Sammy, Noor, and Aisha, to follow the teachings of Islam. On the surface, our life seemed perfect. But deep down, I was struggling. Even as a child, I had moments when I questioned certain aspects of my faith. I remember asking my mother why women were required to cover their hair while men were not. Her answer was simple: because Allah commands it. As I grew older, more questions began to surface. Why was a woman's inheritance half that of a man's? Why were women's testimonies worth less in court? And most troubling of all, how could a merciful God condemn people to eternal punishment simply because they weren't Muslim? These doubts weighed heavily on me, but I buried them deep inside. I told myself that faith meant accepting things I didn't fully understand. But the more I tried to ignore these questions, the louder they became. April 12, 2018, started like any other day. I woke up early for Fajr prayer, prepared breakfast for my family, and helped the kids get ready for school. That morning, Omar mentioned that he needed to work late, so I decided to spend the afternoon running errands and visiting a friend who had just had a baby. By the time I left her house, it was mid-afternoon. The sun was shining, and there was a light breeze in the air. I remember thinking how beautiful the day was and feeling grateful for the life I had. As I drove home along a quiet stretch of road, I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my head. It was like nothing I had ever experienced, intense, overwhelming, and completely debilitating. The next thing I knew, my vision blurred, and the world around me began to spin. I lost control of the car, veering off the road and into a ditch. The impact was violent. I remember hearing the crunch of metal, the shatter of glass, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my body. I was floating above the scene, watching as first responders worked to pull me from the wreckage. I could see everything with incredible clarity: the flashing lights of the ambulance, the concerned expressions of the paramedics, and even the faint sound of a helicopter approaching in the distance. But what struck me most was the overwhelming sense of peace. I felt no pain, no fear, and no attachment to the broken body below me. It was as if I were being held in a gentle embrace, protected from everything happening around me. Then I felt it. A pull, a gentle but irresistible force drawing me away from the scene. The pull led me toward a tunnel filled with radiant light. It wasn't just bright, it was alive, pulsing with warmth, love, and a sense of belonging. As I entered the tunnel, I felt lighter with each step. The burdens I had carried throughout my life, the doubts, fears, and anxieties were stripped away, leaving me with nothing but peace. The walls of the tunnel shimmered with colors I can't describe: gold, violet, and deep blue. They seemed to dance in harmony with a melody that resonated deep within my soul. It wasn't music in the traditional sense, but a sound so pure and beautiful that it felt like a part of me. I thought, this must be paradise. This is what I've been striving for my entire life. As I moved further into the tunnel, the feeling of peace grew more intense. It wasn't just an absence of fear. It was an overwhelming sense of love, unlike anything I had ever experienced. It felt as though the light itself was alive, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I remember thinking, if this is death, I have nothing to fear. The love I felt wasn't conditional. It didn't depend on my actions, my prayers, or my ability to follow rules. It was simply there, vast and endless, surrounding me with its presence. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, yet there was no sense of time passing. Each step I took brought me closer to the light, and with every moment, I felt more alive than I ever had in my physical body. I began to notice that the colors around me weren't static. They moved and shifted, dancing in patterns that seemed to tell a story. Gold flowed into deep blue, which melted into violet, and then burst into brilliant white. Each color carried its own unique feeling: joy, peace, wonder, and awe. And then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a voice in the way we think of voices. It didn't come from outside me, but from within. It resonated deep in my soul, filling me with an indescribable sense of peace and purpose. The voice said, "Layla, you are loved. You always have been, and you always will be." Hearing those words unlocked something inside me. I realized how much of my life had been spent striving, trying to earn love, approval, and a sense of worthiness. I had worked so hard to be a good wife, mother, and Muslim, but I had never felt truly at peace. Now, for the first time, I understood that love wasn't something I had to earn. It was a gift, freely given by a God who knew me completely and loved me unconditionally. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, but the light was calling me forward. As I approached the end of the tunnel, the light grew brighter and more intense. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm and inviting, like the glow of a fireplace on a cold night. I stepped out of the tunnel and found myself in a place that defies description. It wasn't like the paradise I had imagined from Islamic teachings. There were no gardens, no rivers of milk and honey, no gold-threaded cushions. Yet it was more beautiful than anything I could have ever dreamed. The air was filled with a sense of joy and peace that seemed to pulse through everything around me. The light wasn't just above me, it was everywhere, illuminating the landscape and filling me with a sense of belonging. But then the scene shifted. The light began to fade, and I found myself standing on the edge of a barren, desolate landscape. The ground beneath me was cracked and scorched, and the air was thick with smoke. In the distance, I saw flames rising high into the sky. The heat was intense, yet it didn't burn me. It was as if I were standing in two realities at once, one where the fire was all-consuming, and another where I was protected from its effects. Then I heard the cries. They were faint at first, but they grew louder as I focused on them. It was the sound of anguish, of souls in torment, and it pierced my heart. In the midst of the flames, I saw a figure. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as I moved closer, I realized who it was. It was Muhammad. I was frozen in place, unable to process what I was seeing. This was the man I had revered my entire life, the man whose teachings I had followed, whose name I had invoked in every prayer. But he wasn't the exalted figure I had imagined. His face was twisted in agony and his voice was filled with sorrow as he cried out, "I was deceived and I deceived others." Those words shook me to my core. If Muhammad wasn't in paradise, what did that mean for me, for my family, for the billions of people who followed his teachings? I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The reality of what I was seeing was undeniable. Before I could fully process what I was witnessing, a brilliant light appeared behind me. It was even more radiant than the light I had seen in the tunnel, and it seemed to push back the darkness and the flames. I turned, and in the center of the light stood Jesus Christ. He wasn't just a figure of light, he was real, tangible, and filled with authority. His presence was overwhelming, yet it brought a sense of peace that calmed every fear and doubt within me. Jesus looked at me with eyes full of compassion and said, "Layla, you are loved. You always have been, and you always will be." As he spoke, my entire life began to unfold before me. It wasn't like watching a movie. It was as if I were reliving each moment, feeling the emotions I had felt at the time, and understanding the impact of my actions on others. I saw moments of kindness I had forgotten, helping a neighbor carry her groceries, comforting a grieving friend, and teaching my children to pray. But I also saw moments of judgment and pride, times when I had looked down on others for not following Islamic customs, and times when my words had hurt those I loved. Through it all, Jesus stood by my side. He didn't condemn me or make me feel ashamed. Instead, he showed me the truth with love and compassion, helping me understand how every choice, no matter how small, ripples outward. After the life review, Jesus began to reveal the truth about Islam. He showed me visions of Muhammad's life, not the idealized version I had grown up with, but the reality. I saw moments where Muhammad had been deceived by dark spiritual forces. I saw how these forces had influenced his revelations, creating a religion that mixed elements of truth with falsehood. Jesus explained that while many Muslims are sincere in their faith, they are trapped in a system that keeps them from truly knowing God. Salvation doesn't come through rituals or works. It comes through a relationship with Him. Finally, Jesus turned to me and said, "Layla, your time on earth isn't finished. You must go back and share what you have seen." I begged him, "Please, let me stay with you. I don't want to go back." But he smiled gently and said, "I will always be with you. But there are people who need to hear your story. Through you, they will come to know me." The transition back to my body was abrupt and jarring. One moment, I was standing in the radiant presence of Jesus, filled with his love and peace. The next, I was thrust back into the confines of my broken, pain-ridden body. The first thing I felt was pain. Sharp, searing pain radiating through every part of me. My chest burned, my head throbbed, and it felt like my body was weighted down by something unbearably heavy. I could barely breathe. I opened my eyes to see the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital room above me. The sound of machines beeping filled the air, and I could hear faint voices speaking hurriedly in the background. "Her vitals are stabilizing," one voice said. "She's coming back." I realized I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by nurses and doctors. It felt surreal, as if the world I had just left was more real than the one I had returned to. The first face I saw was my husband, Omar. He was sitting by my bedside, holding my hand tightly. His eyes were filled with tears, and when he saw that I was awake, a look of relief washed over him. "Layla, he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're alive. Alhamdulillah, you're alive." I wanted to respond, to tell him everything I had just experienced, but I was too weak to speak. Instead, I squeezed his hand and tried to convey with my eyes the profound changes that had taken place within me. As the days passed and I began to recover, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen and felt during my near-death experience. The tunnel of light, the vision of Muhammad, the presence of Jesus. It was all so vivid, so real. I replayed every moment in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I had spent my entire life devoted to Islam, believing it was the ultimate truth. But now I couldn't deny the reality of what I had encountered. Jesus' words echoed in my heart. "You are loved. You always have been, and you always will be." Those words became my anchor, giving me strength as I faced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. One evening, as I lay in my hospital bed, I decided it was time to share my experience with Omar. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. "Omar," I began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you about what happened to me." He looked at me with concern, nodding for me to continue. I recounted every detail of my experience, the out-of-body sensation, the tunnel of light, the vision of Muhammad, and my encounter with Jesus. I told him about the truths Jesus revealed to me and how they had shaken the foundation of everything I believed. When I finished, Omar was silent. He stared at me, his face a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and anger. "Layla," he said finally, his voice low and tense, "you were near death. You were hallucinating. That wasn't real." "It was real," I insisted, tears streaming down my face. "It was more real than anything I've ever experienced." But no matter how much I tried to explain, he couldn't accept it. As word of my experience spread, the reaction from my community was swift and harsh. Friends who had been like family to me stopped speaking to me. Women I had prayed alongside for years avoided me at the mosque. Our restaurant, which had been a cornerstone of the community, began losing customers. Whispers of betrayal and apostasy followed me everywhere I went. The hardest part was the strain it put on my family. Omar grew distant, unable to reconcile the woman he had married with the person I was becoming. My children were confused and afraid, caught between loyalty to me and their father's insistence that I was mistaken. In the midst of the rejection and isolation, I found comfort in the memory of Jesus' presence. His words, his love, and the peace I felt in his light sustained me through the darkest moments. I began to pray, not the structured prayers I had learned in Islam, but heartfelt, spontaneous conversations with Jesus. I poured out my fears, my doubts, and my hopes, and every time I felt his reassurance. As I recovered physically, I felt an undeniable pull to learn more about Jesus. I started reading the Bible, something I had never done before. At first, it felt strange, even wrong, but as I read, I was struck by the beauty and truth of his teachings. One verse in particular stood out to me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Those words spoke directly to my heart. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and understood. The first person I shared my new faith with was my eldest son, Sammy. He had always been curious and open-minded, and I felt he might understand. "Sammy," I said one evening, "there's something I need to share with you. It's about what happened to me during the accident." He listened quietly as I told him about my experience, his expression thoughtful and serious. When I finished, he said, "Mom, I've always felt there was more to God than what we've been taught. Maybe this is his way of showing us the truth." His response gave me the courage to continue sharing my story, even in the face of opposition. Today, my life looks completely different than it did before the accident. I've embraced Christianity and dedicated my life to sharing the love and truth I encountered during my near-death experience. It hasn't been an easy journey. I've faced rejection, loss, and countless challenges, but through it all, I have felt Jesus' presence guiding me. His love has given me the strength to endure and the courage to share my story with others. Thank you for listening to my story. If it has touched your heart, I encourage you to seek the truth for yourself. Pray, ask questions, and open your heart to the love of Jesus. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to this channel for more testimonies like mine. Remember, you are deeply loved by God, and your life has a purpose. God bless you.